First of all, a very good evening to Honorable Yashwant Sinha, Ma'am, Mr. Chidambaram, Manish Tiwari, his family, distinguished friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. A World Adrift is a book which the subtitle states that it's a parliamentarian's perspective. But for all of us who know Manish, there is Manish a parliamentarian, there is Manish a lawyer, and there is Manish a person. It's very difficult to bifurcate these three personalities from one another. So may I take the liberty of showing Manish's perspective of the world. And it couldn't be more common. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if while you are in power, you have a hotline to the United States. But I definitely know that when you are not in power, that is in the government, that you have a hotline to the United States. But Manish in his book proves that he currently has a hotline to Donald Trump. The timing of this book couldn't be more perfect. For it is he who probably would have advised Trump to go ahead and attack Venezuela, so that the book could be released shortly after and titled A World Adrift. So congratulations Manish ji on the timing and on the title of the book. With regards to the content, there is not much I would like to add because it is something which isn't a usual political perspective that people take. It is profound. It takes into various caveats that have to be taken into account in geopolitics. And it raises various questions that I presume a lot of us wish to ask and probably don't have the direct answers. And hence, with that perspective, it is best that a book launch like this doesn't have the usual odd speeches, but it is actually covered through a question and answer session by one of India's foremost journalists and the author, because geopolitics is a subject where for every answer there is a question. So with that, those words, ladies and gentlemen, I wish Manish ji all the very best. I'm sure A World Adrift will probably bring the world closer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mehra. It is now my honor to invite Mr. Yashwant Sinha to share his thoughts on the book. May we have a huge round of applause.
Manish Tiwari ji, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Manish wrote a brilliant book. Then he looked around, found an old relic, and invited me to release his book. I had to go through the book. I would have gone through it uniquely. But I had to go through the book because I was supposed to say a few words about it here this evening. And as you will imagine, I have read many notes, many books on geopolitics in my career. But this one is exceptionally brilliant. Manish says it is a parliamentarian's perspective on global power dynamics. So when I saw this, I thought for a moment that maybe it was a series of interventions that he had made in Lok Sabha, parliamentarian perspective. But that is where it ends. He is in parliament, but this is not a parliamentarian perspective. It's much more than that. Because the Parliament of India now does not have time to discuss these major issues. There are other issues of the past distant future. The only thing which is not important is the present. Manish says the book is about a world adrift. In the very fast-moving developments which are taking place globally today, one doesn't know whether it is a world which is adrift or it's a world today which is safely anchored in Pax Americana. Because what has happened in Venezuela has raised many issues. On the one side, it has made the post-war global so-called international order completely irrelevant. And it has once again established the imperialism of the world's most powerful democracy. How would the world deal with it? Remains to be seen. As far as trade is concerned, I was wondering why countries like India don't take the matter of these tariffs to the WTO until I found that the US has walked out of it. Where do you go and complain? Similarly, as you are aware, the US has walked out of 66 international organizations. And a day may come, in not too distant future, when suddenly we found that the President of the US has announced that there are no more members of the United Nations. And what can you do then? So therefore, we are faced with a challenge, the like of which we have not faced after the Second World War. After the Second World War, the world was divided, there was Cold War, and there was this, that, and other. But the global order survived. What is at stake today is whether this global order that we have known since 1945, 46, 47 is going to stand up to the challenges or give in. And I'm not really talking about Venezuela here. Look at what happened in Gaza. And what was the role that the UN was playing in Gaza? And the untold suffering of the people there. It's another matter that because of our relationships, diplomatic relations with various countries, we did not. We were not as vocal about it, perhaps, as was needed. But to think that a thing like Gaza could happen at this time was unthinkable. But it has happened. So therefore, we are faced with many challenges. And as I said, I don't know whether the world is adrift or it's anchored safely or unsafely in Pax Americana. But quite clearly, there are threats and there are dangers, and we have to navigate through all these choppy waters with a great deal of dexterity. We may have our own opinions with regard to how we are doing. I must confess that I am not a great admirer of the present government. But I will not that prejudice walk into my or affect my thinking on this subject. When I went through the book, I felt that this is the work of a scholar. Manish is the rare breed of a scholar parliamentarian. There are not many like him in our parliament. And in listening, I strongly recommend all of you distinguished members who are present here to buy a copy of the book. No, I'm not saying on behalf of, please, the publishers. But it is such a well-written book that I think it's a must-read for anyone who is interested in India's foreign policy and current USA. I learned here, and once again congratulate Manish for the brilliant work that he has done in bringing this book to life, his own thoughts, and his scholarship. It's a very great. Thank you very much.
It is now time for the formal release of the World Adrift. May I request Mr. Tiwari and Mr. Krishna to release the report. We now proceed towards 30-minute conversation with the author, with Ms. Mara Shekar. May I request Ms. Mara Shekar to be on the stage.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. One of the advantages of being a moderator is that you get to read a book much before it is unveiled. So I must say that it's beautifully written, and the timing of the book cannot be better. Manish Tiwari, I've tracked him as a politician, as a parliamentarian for nearly 2 decades, as long as I've been a journalist covering policy, international relations, and also economy and politics. It's always a pleasure listening to him and reading his pieces. So congratulations on the book, sir. And so over the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about some aspects of the book which will, I'm sure, generate enough curiosity for all of you to go out and purchase the book. So, Mr. Tiwari, congratulations. Four books already, all critically acclaimed, and now here comes a book right at a time when you have a country raid sitting president and abduct him and take him back. I mean, it's unprecedented, unheard of, and we are talking about it at that time. So you open, sir, in your book by arguing that a world adrift is forcing India into clear and consequential strategic choices. And that strategic clarity is not just desirable, but necessary. These are your words. So when you look at Raisina Hill today, do you see a strategy, or is it a series of tactical firefights?
Well, Maria, first of all, let me commence by thanking Mr. Yashwant Sinha for kindly consenting to release the book. May I also thank all my senior colleagues, Mr. Chitambram, Mr. Ghulam Nabi Azad, Mr. Mukul Vasnik, ambassadors, former ambassadors, and ladies and gentlemen who've actually braved the cold and come out on one of the coldest days so far in this year, and I'm really honored and grateful that all of you took the time to come here. And contrary to what Kapish said, I didn't arrange it with Donald Trump. So to answer your question, what do I see? Well, I see an endeavor for strategic autonomy. So therefore, for any government, or for that matter, any foreign minister, this is not the most enviable position to be in. When I was writing this book and updating it, we finished somewhere around the 12th of December when the book finally went into publication. And between the 12th of December and the 12th of January 2026, the world has moved so quickly that some of the hypotheses, especially queer the United States, which may have been relevant 1 month back, are unfortunately not relevant any longer. So I think the struggle here is that how do we maintain our strategic autonomy? I don't think we are at a point in time where even if we do desire, and even if there is a will, there is room and space to make those strategic choices. I think it would be premature. And so therefore, for anyone who is at the helm of things, what they really need to be doing, and I think that's what any government would do and governments around the world are doing, is to ensure that whatever space that they have, that remains preserved and protected.
So I'm going to move ahead and talk about a paragraph from your book where you write that India therefore lives along with substantial parts of the rest of the world in absolutely unprecedented times. You were talking about that 1 month where things changed far more quickly. We are not witnessing a managed transition from one global order to another. We are living through an interregnum, a turbulent pause with no promise of resolution. What was that moment when you felt that the post-1945 order had truly ended and that we have entered into a new one?
Let me answer that question by, prefacing it with what really are the 5 broad themes that run through this book. First of all, if at all there was a post-World War II order, and I deliberately use those words consciously, that has completely collapsed. You are living in an orderless world. So therefore, obviously, the transition is going to be extremely messy. The second broad theme, and you would find that running across the book, across various chapters, is the relentless rise of China. Now going back to 1978, the rise of China has been relentless. And unfortunately, it has turned potentious also. The third theme which runs through the book is that India, if it has to preserve its strategic autonomy, must remain internally cohesive. Pluralism is no longer a luxury which can be taken for granted. India's cohesion is its biggest antidote to the external challenges that will continue to buffet us. Number 4, there's been a revolution in military affairs. There's been a transformation that has been unprecedented. And what happened between the 7th and the 10th of May 2025, the kinetic actions between India and Pakistan, demonstrate as to how that paradigm has completely changed. So no longer can you fight the battles of the present with the mindset of the past and weapons of the past. You've moved from an informationized to an intelligencized battlefield. And you need to be really cognizant of that. And 5th, there is a flux. There is a vacuum which is opened up. Now, who is going to fill that vacuum? Or if at all that vacuum is going to be filled? Is a question which I don't think anyone has an answer to. But to circle back to where you started from. So, I spent about 3 years in Washington, D.C. as a distinguished senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. That, my term, overlapped with the first Trump presidency. And when you would speak to folks in Washington, D.C., policy folks, people in the administration then, the singular feeling that you would come away with is that the United States is exhausted. After 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a yearning to withdraw. And so therefore it was very clear to me as far back as 2016 or 17 that if the US withdraws from its role as the single outside balancer of power in the world since 1945, there would be a collapse of that order. What I did not anticipate and foresee is that the US itself would undercut that order. And so therefore, from a situation where a withdrawal could have been managed, because President Trump during his first term had started talking about NATO doing the heavy lifting, 2% of GDP contribution by NATO countries. So the signs were all there. Yes, for him also to unravel what had been built by his predecessors between 45 and 2016, I don't think was really easy. And but when he came back the second time, I think a conscious choice had been made that they will not only withdraw, but behave in a unilateral manner, as Yashwantji was saying, withdrawal from 66 multilateral institutions, what happened in Venezuela. And this is just the beginning. The real challenge is going to be Greenland. How the Europeans react on Greenland is really going to determine whether even NATO survives. So therefore, the signs were all there, but I guess we were all hoping against hope that it would go away. And it did go away during the Biden presidency for a while.
So was there a sense then when you were on that fellowship that this will come so soon, in less than a year, in less than a decade? That was 2017 and now we are in 2026.
Well, as I said, we had COVID in between. So nobody thought that the world would survive COVID. And we survived COVID. I think we'll survive the next 3 years. So, but yes, after what happened on the 6th of January 2020, there was a sense that the former president would not be the next president of the United States. And the Biden administration definitely had taken a more internationalist view of things, their support to Ukraine and, some of their other actions in the Asia-Pacific region were far, far more internationalist. But what you've been seeing for the last 1 year is absolutely unprecedented. And that's why I'm saying you are back to the two percepts of the 17th century. Raison d'être. Cardinal Richelieu, that every nation would act in its best interest, and in every nation acting in its best interest, you would possibly construct a world order, which would somehow hold the field. And then Hugo Grotius, the balance of power.
So how will India first, because you're looking at your own interest, self-interest as you said, if it is about India first, then what happens to the neighborhood first policy? Because again, a part of your book, and you talk about the question that you had in the Lok Sabha to the External Affairs Minister, you had asked, while India may have a neighborhood first policy, is there any neighbor of India which has an India first policy?
Yeah, well, I did ask the External Affairs Minister that, and there's a backstory to that. So we were at a conference some years ago, and there's a friend of mine who looks at South Asia very, very carefully. And he asked me this question, he says, you have a neighborhood first policy, but can you name a single one of your neighbors who has an India first policy? And that kind of set me thinking that perhaps there is a paradox somewhere. And when I try to explore as to what really are the contours of India's neighborhood first policy, honestly, I was not able to find any real literature on it. The closest that I came was an answer which the Minister of State for External Affairs, Mr. Muralidharan, had given in 2019 to a question of mine. And an unstart question, and there are many former ministers out here, they know exactly as to how unstart questions are treated in government. But, he said that, we would walk the extra mile, there would be no reciprocity, we would invest in infrastructure. That was 2019. But between 2019 and 2024, things changed very rapidly in India's neighborhood also. And so I think, given the fact that we consider it our eminent domain, we really need to sit down, go back to the drawing board, and see as to what really can we do to get at least some, if not all, our neighbors. And I caveat that because we have a Western neighbor who is absolutely recalcitrant, whatever you may do. Nothing is going to work there. But the rest of the neighborhood, you need to really walk the extra mile.
Okay, so let's move from one neighboring country to another. On Bangladesh, you write about Sheikh Hasina's flight from Dhaka and the violence that followed, and you also note that, of course, this is with concern, Muhammad Yunus's remark that the Northeast could become an extension of the Chinese economy. How close are we, in your assessment, to real strategic vulnerability when it is about this entire Siliguri corridor?
Well, if your question is that have we lost Bangladesh, my answer is no. For the simple reason that we invested blood and treasure in creating the country called Bangladesh. I mean, late Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi, 25 years after partition, redrew the political map of South Asia and created a new country. So therefore, I don't think that reality is really lost on the people of Bangladesh. Unfortunately, you have a government or a transitional government in Bangladesh which seems to be, for inexplicable reasons, if I can use the word, belligerent towards it. And for the life of me, I am not able to understand as to why they may have a grouse with the government which was there previously. But to extrapolate that grouse to include India, it defies any logic. And so therefore, I think if we play it right and play it cautiously, Bangladesh is a country where we have a great emotive connect. And therefore, it would be very much back within our eminent domain. So, I do not see the current turbulence as something of permanence which will not allow us to get into a situation of normalcy. It may not be what we had with Sheikh Hasina, but yes, it would be a far more equitable situation than what we have currently.
Okay, but you also say that there is no greater danger today than the fires being lit across India's neighborhood, each spark threatening to ignite a blaze at India's own doorstep. So if you rank in terms of how concerned should we be, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, which is one country do you and of course Pakistan, which is one country you think that really has, and China, has us worried?
Look, Sri Lanka 2022, Bangladesh 2024, Nepal 2025. Right? You saw regime changes take place as a consequence of the weaponization of social media, which tapped into grievances which may have been real. They could have been manufactured narratives. And that's something which should worry all of us, because there is a capacity gap between the aspirations of the people and what governments are able to deliver. And when I talk about governments, I'm not talking about the current government, but I'm talking about government in a continuum. And that mismatch will always remain, because of the simple reason that contrary to what people may believe, the footprint of the government actually on the ground is fairly a light footprint. It is not really a very heavy footprint. And so therefore you've seen 3 regime changes in South Asia over the past 3 years, or 4 years now. And that's something which we need to be very cognizant about. Nobody's really gone very deeply into the fact whether these were real organic movements which had sprung up from the ground, or they were narratives which were driven because of extraneous reasons. Right? Grievances may have been real, but the weaponization of those grievances is something which I don't think anybody seriously applied their mind to. So therefore, that's a worry. See, insofar as Pakistan and China are concerned, we've had issues with them now going back, many, many decades. So therefore, we are able to manage what I say a cold peace in our neighborhood. But this challenge.
So this is essentially the Gen Z protesters, as they were called, and the protests being called Gen Z protests.
Well, you saw Arab Spring also. And you read Hillary Clinton's book called Hard Choices. And Hillary Clinton has a chapter in that book where she says as to how these activists, even the ones, in Ukraine later, how they were trained in these social media mobilization camps. And that is not to suggest that the United States is involved in any manner in what happened in our neighborhood. But all I'm trying to say is that somebody needs to very deeply look at what happened in these three countries and really discern as to how much was it organic and how much was it really driven by extraneous interests.
Since you've spoken about technology, in particular, and the changing face of war, in the warfare chapter, you describe drones and cyber as rewiring the battlefield, but insist that the future of warfare will continue to be human, and that technology and economics are drivers of trends but not determinants. How should India then avoid this trap?
So here's a question which I've been asking for the last 7-8 years and to which I have no answer. At what point in time does a cyber attack become an act of war which qualifies for a response in the conventional space? What is that inflection point? Is it when your grids go down? Is it when things become even far more serious than that? And this is not a challenge that we are confronting alone. So therefore, technology has completely and absolutely transformed the battlefield. In fact, the greatest battle in the future is going to be in the cognitive domain. It's going to be a battle for the mind space. And the manner in which artificial intelligence especially is being developed, evolved, even weaponized to a great extent, would the human interface become really irrelevant? There's a company called Rhombus Power. I don't know whether you've heard of it. So Rhombus Power is a Silicon Valley startup. It's run by an Indian. It's an Indian entrepreneur who created it. They predicted the Russian invasion of Ukraine 4 months before it actually happened. They were just off by 1 day. And so therefore they looked at almost 5 trillion bits of data. And they mapped out a trend and said that, look, this war is, this invasion is coming. It's another matter that people in government, whichever the government might have been, when they did not take it very seriously. So the conundrum is that while you want to be the master of technology, but you have to also at the same time admit that technology may be sharper than you. So the question is, where do you draw the line, which is start listening to what data is telling you and stop listening to what your mind is telling you? Or if you try and fit the data into your interpretive space, you might end up miscalculating completely. So in the coming decades, this balance between the application of the human mind and the immense kind of power which technology brings to the table is really going to be the most interesting challenge.
But this is also a human problem of strategy. Or do you think it's not even human?
Well, ultimately everything is a human problem, because you see, you cannot be putting every decision in an autonomous mode, right? So therefore you are not going to allow machines to make what they say kill decisions for you. I mean, there is a certain moral compass which humanity still has. So you would not want to outsource all those decisions to a machine. But the nimbleness of the skill will lie. At what point in time do you start or stop listening to that machine?
So it's the time of monsters, as you call it.
Well, in the sense, one world order has collapsed, the other is yet to be born, as Antonio Gramsci said. We live in an age of monsters.
Yes, so the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters, and that you add that India must stand as a steadfast lighthouse, steered by a beacon of national interest, and that's where the challenge is coming because of the new global world order.
Look, India, has a extremely robust democratic tradition. At a point in time when you have nations which have keeled over, India, with all its problems, all its contradictions, the kind of politics that we've been seeing over the past one decade, still continues to be that beacon. But if we push it too far, and what worries me is, pushing the entire spectre of religious polarization to an extent where it weakens our social fabric so immeasurably that we are not able to retrieve it. And we think because it gives us electoral dividends, we can continue pushing the envelope. But there is a limit to that. And so therefore, if India wants to believe, or India believes that it has a certain exceptionalism in the world of today, it wants to preserve and protect its strategic autonomy, it wants to really engage with the world on its own terms, the strength is going to come from internal cohesion. The strength is not going to come from anywhere outside. And that's where we need to focus upon. You see, in another 21 years, we would be 100. In another 23 years, China would be 100. Whether you like it or not, and this is not I saying it, even the External Affairs Minister has said it, you have a 5:1 differential, a power differential between India and China across the board. For you, really, these years, for India, that's just what I worry about. This is the space for consolidation. And if we fritter it away in this very intrinsic he said, she said, which is the staple of our public life today, then I'm afraid the ship would have sailed.
Then what happens to diplomacy being more about continuity?
Well, see, there are strategic continuums. So, Prime Minister Nehru conceptualized non-alignment. There were 2 world wars. And there was devastation, destruction, imperialism was in retreat, colonialism was in retreat. The nations of Asia and Africa were looking for a third way. Prime Minister Nehru gave them a third way. And that held the field from 1947 till 1962, when the Chinese War happened. And when the Chinese War happened, we asked the Americans for help. And within the next 9 years, we had signed a treaty of peace and friendship with the Soviet Union. We had gone the entire 9 yards, because that is what our national interest dictated. And till 1990, we were leaning on the Soviet side, though we were theoretically non-aligned, and in 1990 the Soviet Union collapsed. And then we started looking west, and now we have difficulties with the West. So therefore, when I see the narrative from the government, the so-called multi-alignment is nothing but Nehru's alignment, without giving Nehru ownership of it. Similarly, when you talk about Atmanirbharta, what is Atmanirbharta? It is the self-reliance of late Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi. Before, when she started the Green Revolution and didn't want to be humiliated in the capitals of the world, And what is asking the third? So there are strategic continuums in India's strategic thought. Because ultimately, howsoever any government might experiment, this is the median which you come back. And so therefore, rather than experimenting, if you go down that path, give it the kind of torque it requires, it will give you the strategic autonomy that you're looking for.
I think this is the right note to open the floor for questions. Please, let's move the mic around we'll have 5 questions in all. Yes. Go ahead.
Mr. Manish, recently we have seen Venezuela and China is also having the same type of thinking with Taiwan. Do you think Taiwan will be in the same situation with what happened in Venezuela, and what was the implication to India? Because we are dependent on Taiwan for semiconductor and AI. What's your opinion?
Well, I think you should read the book. There is a whole section on Taiwan. So just to give you a flavor. So in 1944, when the Allies were planning the invasion of Japan, the favored option of the Allied commanders in Washington DC was to invade Formosa, which is Taiwan. And they conceptualized an operation called Operation Causeway. Operation Causeway was given up because the cost was deemed to be too high. And that was at a point in time when the Allies had supremacy in the Western Pacific. And they did not want to take the risk of going the Formosa way. So they ultimately, MacArthur prevailed and they went to Luzon and Philippines and beyond. So Taiwan is not a pushover. Right? So therefore, all this rhetoric that you hear in the newspapers, all the parallels that are drawn, Taiwan is fairly a formidable strategic adversary if it comes to it. And then the relationship is complicated. There are 635 direct flights between Taiwan and the mainland every week. There is billions of dollars of investment both ways. So the Chinese are also wise people. They are not going to risk it. So ultimately, if at all at some point in the future, some modus vivendi is worked out, it is not going to be through the process of violence or war. That's simply, I think, a scenario which is not going to play itself out.
So my question is, a lot of song and dance has been made about Indian diaspora and its influence while forming India's foreign policy by the current administration. How do you see Indian diaspora's role in this forthcoming world in the future? Will it be of any substantial leverage to India?
Well, the first thing is we should polarize our diaspora on political lines. I think the worst disservice that we do to ourselves is by polarizing it on political lines. I don't think that's really serves India's national interest. And number two, given the kind of hyper-nationalism that you see across the world, I think it is really in the interest of the diaspora to look after itself. They would be doing themselves a great service. And you have far, far more experienced people in this hall, people who've actually formulated government policy, and I think they would be in a better position to tell you that government formulates policy based upon inputs from various sources, but ultimately the final determination is made by the government of the day.
spoke about social media movement and now do you think that certain things are being spread, the lies are being spread, rumors are being spread, which are causing disturbance in the world, and this social media is playing role of anti-social media also. So what do you think that how can it be controlled? Thank you.
Media has become anti-social.
In certain manner, not all the manner, to some extent or great extent.
Well, the internet was the most audacious experiment in anarchy, and it has succeeded. It represents the largest ungoverned space on planet Earth. Never before in the history of humankind has so much power concurrently resided on so many fingertips. There's more data which is churned out today, every day, than from the dawn of civilization to the turn of the third millennium. So what you are seeing is a tale of two civilizations. A brick and mortar civilization which was built over 5,000 years, and a virtual civilization which is still evolving. You may physically be sitting here, but you spend the better part of your day when you're working really in the virtual civilization. So therefore there is no way that you can wish the internet or social media away. Question is, how do you put guardrails onto it? Unfortunately, that ship has sailed. There was a time when agreed rules of engagement could have emerged, in the early 2000s. But then the first freedom absolutists in the Silicon Valley opposed it tooth and nail, saying that it is going to stifle innovation. The same way they are opposing artificial intelligence, any guardrails on artificial intelligence. And AI is actually the internet on steroids. So, this is unfortunately something that you'll have to live with. I mean, you try and firewall it, as China has done to a great extent, but then you have enough VPNs to get around it. So this is not something which is going away, and ultimately, how do you stop everybody and his grandmother from being a broadcaster without restraint and responsibility? Is the key question. Everybody is grappling with it. If you have a good answer, I am willing to listen to it.
Excuse me, sir. Congratulations for this book release. At a very apt time and with a very apt title. In this dynamic world, don't you think that before putting world in order, this is the time to put United Nations in order?
Well, we have some very eminent diplomats out here who dealt with the United Nations. Ambassador K.C. Singh, Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee. Look, even in a world order that has inherently collapsed, try and imagine a world without the United Nations. So therefore, the United Nations, with all the bureaucratic inertia, all the follies that it may have, all the problems that it may have. But let us suppose, hypothetically speaking for a moment, as Yashwantji was saying, were the United Nations to be abolished, where would the world be then? So therefore, I think there is a need to have a very, very serious conversation as to how to really contemporize the United Nations. Because that's a multilateral body which has withstood the vicissitudes of 7 or 8 decades. It didn't collapse like the League of Nations. So we need to really invest in these institutions and ensure that multilateralism prevails. You see, notwithstanding all the right-wing populism, all the hyper-nationalism which all of us are kind of deluged with on an everyday basis, if you look at hard numbers, globalization has not really been rolled back. Even the most hyper-nationalist nations cannot do without interdependence. 38% of China's semiconductors still come from Taiwan, despite the billions that they've invested in trying to create a semiconductor industry. So you're absolutely correct. There is a need to reinvigorate and re-energize the institutions of global governance. What you are seeing is an integral, like COVID-19 came and went, this will also come and go.
Please move. Yes.
Good evening. I'm Lisa with the Embassy of Estonia. So thank you for these very interesting remarks, as well as congratulations on your book. I very much look forward to reading it. So I absolutely agree that the world is changing in a very rapid pace, so it's very hard to make any predictions, but I would still seek your views on the short and near-term relationship between India and the EU, given the positives like the conclusion of the FTA and the high-level visits, but also the challenges or difficulties for maybe us more, which is the Trump administration statements regarding Greenland and NATO and the Ukraine peace process and where it's headed. Thank you.
You have 3 high-profile visits from Europe this week, and the German Chancellor is here.
I think we have commonalities and congruence on a number of issues. And so therefore, that's a relationship which needs to be energized with as much vigor as possible. I think the problem for a long time has been that India has had the greatest relationship with many European countries. But this whole conception of divided sovereignty between Brussels and the various countries which make up the EU, we've never really been able to wrap our heads around that. And so therefore, that's been, in my estimation, a stumbling block in a more robust relationship with the European Union collectively. Otherwise, if you look at it, India has had the greatest trade relations, strategic relations with many, or the major European powers across the board. To your question about Greenland, I would reverse the question and ask you that how much are the Europeans prepared to stand up? I think that's really going to be the litmus test. And so therefore the whole world actually would look towards Europe and see as to whether this unilateralism or transactionalism can really be halted. To your third question, well, Ukraine is absolutely a tragedy, and what's been happening there since 2022, is a complete travesty, as what even happened in the Middle East, between Israel and Gaza. And question is, eventually, not President Zelensky and Ukraine alone. How much will the Europeans collectively stand up to the peace plan? How much would Ukraine really have to give? So, really all eyes are going to be on Europe over the next couple of months.
Last question.
Manish, what is your take on this whole rhetoric of South-South cooperation? The BRICS, India is going to host BRICS this year. The de-dollarization and the Trump chasing all the BRICS countries with punitive tariffs. Do you think this South-South cooperation rhetoric will really matter and see light of the day? Thank you.
Well, again, India's leadership of the global south is a historical continuum. The thing is that we chose to neglect it, because of changes, in the world in the early 90s. But if you really look at it, the global south has commonalities in terms of human developmental challenges, It has commonalities in terms of experiences which they can share. So therefore, on the South-South bit, there is something, much more to be done by India than what we are doing currently. Well, on de-dollarization, that's a chimera, absolutely. I mean, 85% of global transactions today are still dollar denominated, despite whatever trade some of the BRICS countries may be doing with each other. So, I don't think it would be prudent for BRICS also to really go down that path, because then you end up opening up a Pandora's box which you will not be able to close.
And with that, it's the end of this session. But before that, my last question, and this is for on the behalf of several aspiring authors in this audience, what makes a practicing lawyer, a sitting member of parliament, to publish books? What drives it? Published already, and this is the 5th.
If I was able to answer that question, I would have definitely answered it. But the one thing I tell myself every time I write a book and release it, that this one is the last. I am not going to do the next one. So yeah, I mean, see, the one thing which putting pen to paper does is that it brings a lot of integrity to your thought process. So I guess it's more about, you're thinking things through, which really drives you to write. So yeah, so that's ended up producing 4 or 5 books. But as I said,
this is the last one.
If I can draw the line, I would want to.
All right. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you to the audience as well.
As we come to a close of the evening, I would like to thank Sri Yashwant Sinha ji for graciously releasing this important work, Mr. Manish Tiwari for giving us a book that dares to confront uncomfortable truths, and Maria for an engaging dialogue. Thank you all the guests for being a part of this evening. The books are available for sales outside the hall, and Manish will be